The recent unrest in parts of Kwazulu-Natal and Gauteng have left extensive damage to property, with several shopping centres burnt to the ground. President Cyril Ramaphosa strongly criticised these actions, saying there can never be any justification for vandalism and public violence. But it's not unusual for South Africans to destroy property during protests, which later requires large sums of money to fix. But what compels protesters to take this drastic action? Violence monitor and analyst Professor Mary Haas joins me now to this discussion. Professor Mary, very good morning. Thank you for speaking to us. I suppose that first question is, what rallies people to acts of violence?
Look, there's different levels of this, and would you mind turning your volume up a bit? Your voice is very faint. Good morning, everybody. Look, there are different levels of this violence. So there's a plan that it was very well orchestrated, and I do not know what the ultimate aims of it are, obviously to cause this much damage, but it's very clear it's linked to the internal machinations of the ANC itself, because a lot of people, the ANC started acting against corruption, and the networks, which political and economic, which feed into all that corruption, are of course suffering, or they will suffer if they continue to be suspended, sidelined, whatever. But when you get down to the actual way, the mentality of people who do this, look, there's different people doing it. All we know is it's orchestrated. I could give you the example, for example, of a shack area in Durban, which have pieced the whole thing together. And it starts with a criminal councillor who's got a mafia network and sends people to loot, and he in turn is linked to the councillors in eThekwini, because eThekwini, don't forget, is Zuma supporting. You got on to the ticket as a councillor in the last local government elections as a Zuma supporter. Okay, now you've got that. Now, it's easy to stir up poor people to go and help themselves. Looting is something that a kind of mob mentality takes over. You could look at what's happened elsewhere in England 10 years ago. Very similar phenomenon. What you can't explain, of course, is why people who are wealthy to start with go in and help themselves to luxury goods. They arrive. I mean, not all of those looters were poor people walking up the hill to their shack settlement in Durban with their stolen goods. A lot of them were well-off people, judging from the cars they were driving and the type of goods they were taking. So we as a nation now have to ask ourselves, what happened to our moral compass? It's just disappeared in the last 25 years.
Well, it would appear so. I mean, I'm certainly glad you raised the issue of those that appeared to be well off, that were part of the looters. Obviously, stuff that circled on social media, individuals running into Woolies and chucking stuff in the back of their Mercedes-Benz and other expensive vehicles.
I can't hear you. Sorry, the line is too faint. Can you turn the volume up a bit, please?
Well, I'm sure the guys in control have heard you and are turning up the volume. My next question, Professor, is around the types of looting, or certainly the violence that occurs around it. Now, we've seen people pick up bricks and throw rocks at structures, but we've also seen people burning structures. What causes or leads to arson? Is this professional, or is it just wanton individuals choosing to burn stuff?
It's a difficult question to ask, because we've all seen the footage from the malls. Look, for example, it could be a distraction for criminal activities in Edendale Mall in Pietermaritzburg, for example. I was sent a video clip of a guy that's using the chaos around him to bust into an ATM and actually help himself towards the money. I sent that on to some police management in the area in case they can use it. So it does disguise other things. When you create enough chaos, you can get on with all sorts of criminal activities. But the burning seems to me just a terror tactic of some sort, a warning, because that in itself led to a lot of racial polarization, don't forget. Because there were, I'll give you an example. This is happening, everybody knows it's happening in the kind of what were always black African areas in Maritzburg. Well, earlier this week, a black African, it's important to say this because of the racial polarization, got hold of me and said, these guys, the suspected looters areas. And this particular one was largely, because of the old apartheid divisions within cities, it was largely an Indian area. And this person who got hold of me specifically said, please get the police to act on that, because otherwise we're going to be having more racial polarization, because this is an Indian area. Now, that is exactly what's happened in Durban. You try to block the roads, and it's fine to put some obstacles in the road as long as you do it with the police. That's the crucial thing. You can't just take the law into your own hands and say, I'm going to block this road. You work with the local police. You help the local
Professor,
police.
I have to come in there, because for some people it appeared that the only way they could be protected was to take the law into their own hands. I'm not trying to justify it, neither is it right. But there was no police presence in many areas to be seen. Countless places where our reporters visited, they were there before the police. In fact, in many instances, the police never pitched.
Killed by security companies who just happen to have an Indian face. Do you see how this is actually contributing? And even white people are scared. So this is actually polarizing races.
Professor, it's not just about white people and Indians. I mean, in the reports that we've picked up, there was a young woman in a report yesterday who was assaulted by non-black individuals, and her car was burnt. So I think everybody is scared.
Yeah, no, everybody. This is intensified fears, and the fact that food is being difficult to come by, that is going to be the next problem. Well, we're not out of the woods yet. This network is so well organized, they will carry on unless they are identified and exposed.
So a question I'd like to ask really is, moving forward, you've just said we're not out of the woods yet, so presumably everything returns to normal. What doesn't return to normal is the tension and the race relations. How do we fix those? How do we fix that problem?
Look, I think there's got to be a concerted effort on different fronts for this. I think there's got to be correct information put out that this is a group of criminals, because unfortunately, I just want to make it clear, there's criminals in all sectors of society. I'll give you an example. For example, hijacking syndicates can be multiracial. Drug dealing syndicates can be multiracial. They can be situated in the well-off areas of Durban, the brains behind it in terms of organization. But the people they use are poor people who are black Africans, the unemployed. That it's not poverty that drives it. It makes you recruitable if you don't have a job, and that's how you get the drug runners. But as I said, you've got to look behind that. You've got to look to the organization. So we are a criminalized state, basically. That is the problem. Now, the people doing the damage are visibly poor. Like hitmen. Poor unemployed people, and most of them are black Africans because of the state of the economy. So that's the visible face of this. But for all we know, those behind it are white, Indian, so-called colored. We shouldn't have been using these racial categories, and black Africans. But the visible face of it, like the visible face of the hitmen, are the black Africans, simply because it's easy to deploy them to do this, to cause trouble. So we start with trying to tell people this is the way the system works, and there's still a lot of racial goodwill in all of this. And the whole problem with the fact that in Durban the Indian community was targeted was that we have the old racial city. We have the middle-class areas in the middle, which are now non-racial, but still predominantly white, I suppose. Because
Great that you raised that, Professor. I think it potentially gives you... Sorry, Professor.
So that's why.
Just coming back to the race issues, glad that you've raised it, but I suppose it also allows, well, certainly you, to proffer your solution on how do we quell the race tensions. That's not what I have been able to get out of you.
Yeah, no, I'm getting to that. So you start with information, but you also start with the leadership of all these different groups, the political, the economic, bringing people together across the racial divide to look for solutions, to go into their communities and preach this message. And I mean, the faith-based organizations are well placed to do this, to heal these broken relationships. But we also need the criminal justice system to work. If you have security companies that are white or Indian killing, the face of them, killing black Africans, for example, there will be another racial. It will go from one to the other. It will set in motion. You have to do, it's two-pronged. First, do justice. Linked to what I said about these criminal syndicates and the people behind them, you identify them, you charge them, in this case for sedition, incitement, but you then also, and you convict people if they have killed people or injured people or damaged property. So you do that while at the same time you reach out across the racial divides. We have to have a whole reconciliation thing now, I'm afraid, using accurate information about why these things happen, but also bringing together influential leadership. And as I said to you, the people who are perfectly placed to do this are the faith-based organizations who are present in all communities. So it's a mixture, and the politicians themselves. I mean, you've got different political parties who are trying to heal the divides, but so it's a double-pronged strategy.
What about the education system? What are your thoughts around that? Because racism obviously is not inherent in any of us. It's learnt, it's taught. Should we start with the youngsters when they're in school?
I can't hear your question. This is a really bad line. Sorry about that. Can you just speak a little louder, please?
Okay, I'm going to scream at the top of my voice, Professor. I said that racism is not inherent in any of us. It is one of those things that is learnt. Should the place to start be in the education sector with little children in school?
Absolutely. I mean, this should be part of... I mean, look, the education thing is another disaster here. We don't do the right sort of education apart from the absolutely poor standards of literacy. Don't forget, a lot of these people have been very badly educated. Our literacy, our numeracy levels, but side by side with that should be a proper life skills education. It's not difficult to do, which encompasses all these myths about other people, and why people behave like they do. I mean, and fostering at a primary school level the sort of interaction, facilitating dialogue at a primary school level between kids of different races, for example, to get to know each other, because that is a key way of breaking down these barriers. I saw this under apartheid, where people were physically as spatially isolated. Whites didn't have a clue about what was going on in black areas. They thought this was just the way blacks behaved when the state-sponsored violence, which was white-directed, the apartheid government, got people out creating havoc for political reasons. Now, when you grow up, understanding, knowing people, because, even I used to sit in meetings with professionals, and whites didn't have a clue. Even between white and black professionals, there was no dialogue. So you start with this sort of thing at a young age. And the problem is, of course, that we are still very isolated educationally, apart from even the Model C schools and the private schools could be doing a lot of this, for example. But you are leaving behind the racially segregated schools. So look, this is something that could be part of an ongoing dialogue. Look, you must also remember one very important thing, and that is there was a real outreach during the Mandela and Mbeki years to build a nation-building exercise. That fell completely apart when Zuma came in as president, and he started this whole tribal thing. You had then a real overt racism thing in some areas because, you know, I mean, in this province, for example, there was a big drive to try.
Professor Mary de Haas, thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we've just about run out of it. Violence monitor and analyst, Professor Mary de Haas.